Good morning, Vietnam!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family.
Here's Johnny!
Whoa, this is heavy. I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Working on my day off.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 8th episode of the Showtime with Roman podcast, the not-so-feature-length podcast where I, your host, Roman RBC, brings on a guest to chat about our favorite things in the entire world, and that is movies, film, cinema, kino, whatever you want to call it. It's a bright and early episode of recording anyways, 7:30 a.m. sharp. On the 8th episode, I have Caleb Danger Spate with me, fellow Arizona resident, to chat about a very controversial and interesting topic that we're going to try and make a point about. So, Caleb, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. I've been awake for 2.5 hours, so I feel like you have to do that when you live in Phoenix. That's when the sun comes up.
Yeah.
It's 5 a.m., so sun's up. You got to be up. Plus, being a dad, you have like those few short moments in the morning before your kid wakes up and just like is the loudest thing possible. So it's like your only moments of quiet that you have to treasure. So That's why I wake up at 5 a.m.
Yeah, see, I'm in a really big family, and I do cherish those moments of quiet, because last week there was that infamous teachers walking out thing where they were, what was it, a week that they weren't in school?
It was almost exactly a week.
Yeah, and so I usually work nights, and so I usually don't go to work until about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and the kids, my siblings anyways, don't get home until about 3:30, 4 o'clock, so that entire time from 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. till about 3:30 is my moment of zen and peace and quiet. And the fact that they weren't in school was like, now not only do I have to deal with kids at home, but I have to deal with kids at work. And so it was just constant noise. And I just wasn't, my body wasn't used to it, my head wasn't used to it. It was exhausting.
It was kind of a perfect storm with Infinity War coming out, that like there was no good time to go see the movie because kids were everywhere seeing it at all times. Yeah. So it was just sold out like everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I don't like to think the country revolves around Arizona, but I feel like it made that $258 million because there was no school that weekend.
Hey, might as well see it 5 times.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, speaking of Infinity War, it also, it's amazing that the two biggest things in the world regarding like entertainment right now is Fortnite and Avengers. And believe it or not, but like today they like crossed over. So like in Fortnite, you can play as Thanos. And you can, like, jump up in the air, launch to the ground, shoot him with the power gem. You can punch him with the time stone. It's pretty amazing, kind of just how things are crossing over so much now, especially with Avengers, It's the biggest thing in the world.
That'd be a fun video game, just like a Thanos video game where you can use all 5 of the stones, or maybe you're searching for the stones or something.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to get on that.
Yeah, that would actually be really cool. I'd actually be down with that. Hopefully it's just as good as the movie is, because the movie is pretty good. But that's actually not the crossover we're going to be discussing today.
What?
Yeah, believe it or not, believe it or not, there was a crossover event 2 years ago that was multiple years in the making, years and years of hype, dying to see these two titans, ended up being 3 titans on the big screen come together. And
maybe 5 titans.
Yes, maybe 6 too. I don't know. There's just so many people in there, so many characters, so many beloved characters over decades and decades long of comics and TV shows and other movies as well. And that movie is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which is a significantly more divisive film than probably anything else out there outside of The Last Jedi right now. And
for sure,
The Last Jedi is a film that would have been a great example to use here, but we ended up going with Batman v Superman because it has been a little bit longer. It's been just over 2 years since it's come out. So even though there is obviously a lot of dislike towards it, then there's at least time behind it, where at least it's mellowed a bit and it's not nearly as fiery as it was even just a year ago. So Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is a movie that we're going to use as an example today to sort of make a point about how movies connect or disconnect with specific audience members, because I love the film. I think it's a great film, and you think it's not good. You would give it like a 2.5?
Yeah, like 2.5 to 2.9. I just can't get to that fresh mark.
Yeah, just okay. So it's a movie that is just rooted in so much divisiveness, like just from every angle imaginable, between how Batman is interpreted to how Superman is interpreted, to Lex Luthor especially, to Wonder Woman, to certain editing choices, scenes, and all that stuff. And leading up to Batman v Superman originally, back in March of 2016, it's the first movie I got a pre-screening of, and I'll always hold that as a special place in my heart, because as someone who wants to review movies for a living, that to have Batman v Superman be the first is pretty special for me. But outside of that, it's a movie that leading up to it, people weren't so high on Man of Steel. The trailers gave a lot away, and come release of the theatrical cut, it's a movie that I saw with no expectation whatsoever besides like my excitement, my concerns I had, and I ended up loving it, even though it was just so much to take in, because the screening wasn't until like 8 p.m. at night, so I didn't get out until like 10:30, and I was in line for like 6 or 7 hours. So it was pretty intense, to say the least, but I ended up walking away loving it. And then I was, for some reason, maybe I just convinced myself, but I honestly thought a lot of people were going to love it. And so what was your initial reaction towards Batman v Superman? Because you had the luxury of Rotten Tomatoes scores. You had the luxury of a little bit more of an audience perception. So what were your thoughts on Batman v Superman heading into it?
Yeah, I kind of wish that I would have seen it like pre all that stuff, just to get a fresh perspective, because you never really know what truly influences you. Mm-hmm. I know that just for me, I'm almost like 99% in agreement with Rotten Tomatoes on almost every film. So I feel like I'm just kind of like the main line, just kind of average moviegoer. Maybe just with a little bit of higher taste in there sometimes, and then even some lower taste sometimes. But I wish I would have gone in with some fresh eyes, and really I wish I would have gone in without having seen that third trailer that gave a lot away.
Yeah.
Because I was really excited for the movie. The first and the second trailers, I was like, okay. And then it was when that third trailer dropped that I was like, this doesn't look like what I was expecting. And that's probably a lot of my problems, is that going into the movie I had certain expectations, and you mentioned The Last Jedi, and I think that's what people had. They had all these expectations of what they wanted to see, and then there's just the initial blow of not getting what you want that kind of affects it in a little bit of a way. And so when I went into Batman vs Superman, had certain expectations. I think that third trailer brought them way down, because I think once Jesse Eisenberg opened his mouth and started talking for a long time in that party scene in the trailer, I was like, okay, I'm not going to like this guy. And then with Doomsday popping up at the end, I'm like, okay, well, how are they going to cram all this stuff in there? And so I was just worried. Mm-hmm. So I brought my expectations down. I will say that I didn't hate the movie. Like, I thought that I would go in and be like, wow, that was a pile of trash. But there was a lot that I liked, and there's a lot that I still like. And I'm curious to see on another rewatch if it'll get even better for me, because I've only seen it twice. So seeing it in the theater, and then I bought the Ultimate Edition when it came out, and I liked that a little better, but for me, it did not fix the problems that I had with the movie.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen the movie a whopping 8 times. I saw the theatrical cut 2 times in theaters. I saw the Ultimate cut when it released in theaters a couple weeks before the Blu-ray came out, and I saw that at the theater we saw Blade Runner 2049 at. And it was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, seeing it, because a lot of people that were there were fans of the film. So for me,
Dolby Digital just automatically adds a star to any rating.
yeah, I mean, it honestly enhances, like, it did enhance the experience both times, because I saw Blade Runner 2049 twice in theaters, and I saw it at Dolby Digital, and then I saw it at in IMAX. And so, like, I got the ultimate movie-going experience for that movie, and it's one of my favorites ever, and it's so good. But for Batman v Superman, you know, seeing it in a theater full of fans was a great experience for me, because I was seeing it with hundreds of other people that loved and saw what I saw, right? And so there is sort of that validation there that all of us sort of seek, implicit or explicit. And, you know, it's a theater-going experience that, to me, was one of my favorites, because it's a movie that is so divisive, and there aren't a lot of people like me who do enjoy it. So being able to see it with all those people was a really rewarding and really refreshing experience, because when I saw the theatrical cut, I saw it in a packed, overpacked IMAX screening at Arizona Mills, and that's a pretty big theater, because I think that's the biggest IMAX screen in the state.
Yeah, that's the only like true IMAX screen in Phoenix, I think.
Yeah, and so I saw it there, and it was an experience where once the movie started, everyone let out like just a big breath, because they were like, okay, this is it. The no trailers play, so you just dive right in, right? I believe there's an introduction by Zack Snyder too, but and then when the movie ended, you know, there was just some chatter. There wasn't like, the people weren't like freaking out. There was obviously lots of big moments, like Wonder Woman arriving, that, you know, garnered lots of cheers and everything, and there's a couple laughs with Perry White. I think he's pretty good comedic service for the film. And I was with my friend, and we went to Denny's and chatted about the film and just had some omelets. And it was a movie that the next day the Rotten Tomatoes score came out, and I was still genuinely surprised. Like, I just felt like everyone was gonna love it, but, you know, that was just probably me just sort of pulling the blinds over, and not realizing that there are certain films that just don't connect with other people like they connect with me. And this was sort of like my big like wake up call with that, because it was such a big film, and one of my most anticipated films ever, one of everybody's most anticipated films ever. And like you mentioned with The Last Jedi, you know, there is this sort of expectation when you are so familiar with characters growing up, whether it's in the same franchise, whether it's in past films or past mediums with comic books or TV shows. And the one big point, and I mentioned this last week on the podcast when I had Brady Warren on, is that the big reason I wanted to start the podcast was to showcase that there are films that connect or disconnect with people, and there are films that do things that connect with us, and films that do things that don't connect with us. And, you know, that's what's so beautiful about this art form, is that we live in a time where so many different types of film are coming out, from, you know, superheroes to westerns to cold crime dramas and stuff like that. And with a movie like Batman v Superman being the big titan that it is, and sort of putting together this superhero genre with what I would consider like a Greek tragedy, is something that I really feel like I never knew I wanted. And that's sort of what Batman v Superman is to me. And going into my 9th rewatch later on, or after we record this first half, I'm excited to just sort of see it again, because it's been a while. So,
right. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to see it again is because I want to like this movie.
Yeah.
Like, when I saw Man of Steel the first time, I think that was the first big blow, like, to me, after The Dark Knight Rises. I think Dark Knight Rises was probably, like, my first, like, big punch in the face that I was like, wow, that wasn't good. And then I couldn't figure out why a bunch of people liked the movie. Mm-hmm. Because there was just so many problems that I had with that. And then to find out that the reason why that movie was kind of bad is because David S. Goyer had writer's block, and so he started working on Man of Steel instead. So I kind of held a grudge against Man of Steel a little bit. I'm like, you're the reason why. Like, Rises isn't that good. Yeah. And then walking into Man of Steel, first time I watched it, didn't like it. But upon reviewing it and seeing it again at home and seeing it for the movie that it is, I was able to appreciate it a little bit more. And there's still some problems that I have with it, but I would still give Man of Steel like a fresh rating. To me, it's not like the Superman movie that I was expecting, but it was a cool modern take on Superman. And so going into Batman vs. Superman, I like how they continued that arc of this is the modern Superman where he's criticized for everything because he lives in the 21st century, not the 20th century. And in the 21st century, we're a lot more cynical.
Yeah.
We point the fingers at people.
Nihilistic in ways.
Yeah. And so like this is a Superman that exists in this kind of world. And so I never bought into the narrative that like, oh, this is not my Superman because he's all dour and stuff all the time. Like, well, I can kind of see how you'd be upset, but I also see what Zack Snyder's going for. It's maybe not what I want, but I can appreciate what he's going for.
Yeah, and you know, growing up, I've watched Christopher Reeve's Superman hundreds of times. He defined a section of my childhood. He is the reason that Superman was one of my favorite characters growing up. Until I got a little bit older, I started falling in love with Batman, and he became one of my favorite superheroes. But what Zack Snyder did with Man of Steel specifically is I feel like he took a character that it was hard to relate to and turned him into a character that was like, here is this guy that can do everything. Literally anything he wants. He has unlimited power, absolute power, and sort of brings him down to our level in a way where I feel like even though, because all of us have our own special abilities, right? All of us are good at some things, and all of us have like our own attributes that we excel with. And for Superman, he's a character that just has like all this power, but in a way, like that doesn't prevent him from being criticized. That doesn't prevent him from being painted as this sort of figure that is here to bring death and destruction. He's a figure that makes us feel lesser as human beings. And there's a section in Batman v Superman specifically that will ultimately be the scene that makes me fall in love with the film, and that's when he's watching the news, and there's sort of this discussion revolving around, you know, do we need a Superman? What does the meaning of Superman mean for our existence? And so the Superman here, it's not subtle, but Superman here, like it symbolizes like not the entire arc that Jesus went through, but in a lot of ways is a lot of hardships that he had to face as someone that, you know, came into this world and had all these, you know, abilities to change lives. And people were scared of him, and the people were concerned that a being like this existed, and that there were kings and politicians that believed that he needed to be, you know, restrained, and he needed to abide by their laws and their regulations and things that they set. And so there's a lot of things that Zack Snyder does here that evoke that same type of thing that Jesus had to go through. And, you know, Jesus, you know, one part of his story ending with, you know, him having to walk up the mountain and sort of, you know, even though he knew his ending, he still did it for the good of people. And that's ultimately what happens to Superman at the end of Batman v Superman, where, you know, he has all these powers and he could probably there could be another way to kill Doomsday, right? But he realizes that for the greater good of the people, you know, he needs to sacrifice himself to, you know, show people that he's here to save us. And so there's that one big act of selflessness that shows us that, you know, maybe we need to be a little more selfless and just not, you know, and just realize that maybe everything isn't so cynical. Maybe everything isn't so nihilistic. Maybe there is a chance to come back from falling from grace for Batman, and for people that fell from grace other than him. And I just think the movie to me just really just speaks to me as a person that just sort of likes being, I guess, challenged in a certain way in terms of like what movies can accomplish in specific genres. And I feel like that's why it might speak to me on that level. So,
man, trying to pull the Jesus card, getting me to like this movie. Trying to push my buttons.
Well, I know that you are someone who is rooted in faith and has lots of beliefs and, you know, attends church and whatnot. And so I just kind of, what's your like stance on that? Is that something that you didn't notice before? Is that something you did notice but you feel like they might have, you know, not done too good of a job on? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I think you'd be an idiot not to notice it. I mean, in the movie, because there's so much imagery. Like, okay,
yeah,
I mean, he's literally standing in front of like a stained glass window right now. Like, we can see what Zack Snyder's trying to do, and I really liked those aspects of Superman. I just think that I would have wanted more. I want more of Superman in this movie, because going in after rewatching Man of Steel and liking it a little bit better, I wanted the Man of Steel sequel. And I just don't really feel like I got that. I got a little tiny bit of it, but I think it needed to be fleshed out a little bit more for me to appreciate it as a whole. And so I don't think that the movie really accomplished that.
Yeah, I think that in a way, for me, it's so strange that, after all these viewings that, because there have been viewings where I'm like, okay, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to try and, see what other people see. I jotted down notes of what people don't like, and I was like, let's look for this and let's look for this. And then for me, when I watch it, I just sort of get sucked into like this just incredibly large scale and scope of a story, and in a story to me that just speaks to me on so many levels as somebody that has gone through something recently that I haven't spoken too much about because it's just technically not a lot of people's business, but going into my rewatch, it might even affect me more. But just thinking about it, because it's a movie I think about every day, believe it or not. But so there was something recently that came up where I sort of have been having like these triggers and these moments of trauma, very light trauma, but nothing too dramatic. And so for a character like Batman, and we'll get into the big Martha moment later on, after we rewatch the film, but for Batman, he's a character that is somebody who has his own ways of coping with trauma. And we've seen that in past iterations. Some have shown it better than others. Batman Begins to me has been the film that I feel like has shown Batman coping with PTSD the best out of all of the Batman films. But I just feel like in Batman v Superman, Zack Snyder, he does it in a way where it just feels so it just hits so close to home now, where he has these coping mechanisms that he is kind of miserable. He doesn't really enjoy what he's doing, but it's his own way of coping with his witnessing his parents' death right in front of his very eyes. And I feel like it's just a character that everyone has said this since day one. A lot of defenders of the film, and I'll agree that it's just like a deconstruction of like these sculptures, just these gods, these beings that say that even though they do have these insane powers and they do have these abilities to do things, and they are these figures that we look to for for being saved, that they are still in a way very much so human, and they do have like these flaws, and they do have these they do have personal issues and obstacles that they need to overcome. And I just think that what he does in this movie is that he has the ability to just really capture it with the lens in a way that is really inspiring. And a lot of the times, a lot of the imagery in the film to me is something that you would see in like an ancient Greek museum and sort of see on like these epic murals, or like these I've been playing lots of God of War lately, and so that's kind of where it comes from, is that there's lots of points in that game where one of the characters is reading stuff through visual imagery, like these storyboards essentially, and he sort of talks about how these gods went through like all these hardships and the things that they did for people and the enemies that they fought. And that's the sort of vibe I get, and I feel like Zack Snyder accomplishes that really well in this movie. I think
he does a really good job of deconstructing these characters, and I think he had some practice with Watchmen, just because Watchmen is very much the deconstructive of the comic book genre in general. But I just think that it's weird that the overall plan for the DC universe, like they would do that in the first essentially like launch of the DC EU, that they would take that opportunity to do that rather than waiting like a couple movies in to establish these characters and then to do that. But I mean, I can see both sides, and you can make the argument that like, hey, you're setting up this universe as something that is like deconstructed. But then you have Wonder Woman, which we've never really had an origin movie for, but it felt very much like the true beginning of what the DC EU should have been, with just these different origin movies. And so it's very clear that they don't really know what they're doing. And I think even people who like Batman vs Superman would agree that DCU just as a whole is just constantly fumbling the ball everywhere that they're going. Yeah,
exactly. And even though I do agree that they do fumble the ball, I feel like they always at least recover it. And And so I just think that, and I do agree though, you make a really good point about how they did kind of want to set the tone with like the deconstruction. And the more I think about it, even though I do constantly and consistently love Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Wonder Woman as well, is that I feel like they didn't realize that they needed to start a universe that was instantly accessible. Just make something like Wonder Woman that is so highly revered, make it accessible, and then you can do stuff like this, because then you can be, because look at, when we talked about it yesterday, when you wanted to talk about, do you want to bring in, any sort of like MCU points?
I was saying, it's hard not
It's
to.
really hard not to, because that's the standard. And so for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even though I'm not a huge fan of the universe, and even though I think a lot of their movies are just okay, looking at that universe with the really on a larger scale and what it was able to accomplish, look what they did. They made films that were easily accessible, and then they dive into things that are a little bit more weird. Do I think they have like the thematic resonance and deconstruction level of Batman v Superman? No. But for a lot of people, that's exactly what it did. It was accessible. It was these origin story films, and then they dived into the weird. They got into the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Doctor Stranges. And
well, even when you think about the deconstruction of a character, you can look at Iron Man 3 as something that's kind of close in the psychological level, but you don't start the MCU with Iron Man 3, or else people are like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, and see, that's a point I completely agree with, because even though I love, like I said, love these movies, it's like, there's just a specific audience for these types of movies, and it's just, to start your universe like that is not a good tone setter, because it's so much to take in. It's a lot of content, it's a lot of new, it's a lot of different, especially it came out in 2016, and this was right on the brink of Civil War. This was right after a pretty solid 2015 for Marvel, especially after the hype of Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014 and Winter Soldier, which is still what many would consider the best MCU film. And so it's like, it's just such weird timing, and I feel like it's important to get movies like Batman v Superman, but when you're trying to start a universe, it's not a movie that you really want at the beginning of the universe. You kind of want to lead into it and sort of ease people into it, because it is, I wouldn't say jarring, but it's just so much to take in, and it's so different compared to what we're used to seeing, and that's why Marvel's the standard, and that's why they're the universe that they're going to be from now until when they're done, whenever that's going to be. And with them making $258 million opening weekend, we won't see that stopping anytime soon. And with DC films not nearly making as much, we might end up seeing the sort of end of that. But it's pretty unfortunate. So we kind of have talked about, the lead up into, Batman v Superman, and sort of just our thoughts on like previous viewings and like general consensus and everything. So we're going to watch the film again. I'm going to go ahead and watch it for a 9th time. You're going to watch it for what, a 3rd time you said?
Third time. Second time with the ultimate cut.
Second time with the ultimate cut. So we're going to go ahead and rewatch the film. We'll come back. We'll sort of assess, talk a little bit more about some specifics of the film. We both messaged each other last night about what to look for on each other's end. I mentioned Lex Luthor a little bit. I mentioned sort of the foreshadowing with visuals in certain areas, and then you messaged me about sort of the little things that, like, the pointless things that don't really, like, why are they in there? And
it's just a lot of wasted screen time.
Yeah, and so we're going to go ahead and look into that, and then we'll be right back. So thanks for listening to the first half. We'll be right back with a little bit more. And we are back from rewatching Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. As mentioned previously, 9th time for me, 3rd time for you, Caleb. So I'm just going to let you go ahead and get into it first, because I feel like you have some more thoughts on the film than I do at this point, because I have sort of revealed a lot of the things that I do love about the film. So go ahead and dive into a lot of the things that just don't quite connect with you as an audience member.
Well, I only had to take 2 bathroom breaks, so it was pretty good. Yeah. I think I had to take 3 the first time, but it's still just a really long movie, and maybe I felt like it was longer just because, like, as a dad, like my time is just so limited that I'm like, man, am I really spending 3 hours to watch this again? Yeah. But I think there were some things that I can forgive. Like, time has been pretty decent, I think, to this movie. Some of it still holds up. It looks really good.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that even some of the complaints that I had, maybe I don't, a lot of them were just kind of nitpicky, and I think I can kind of sweep those under the rug a little bit. Some of the bigger issues I have are still kind of there, but there actually are still a lot of things that I liked, and that I liked even more on this time. Just the overall feel and the look of the movie is so great, especially since this movie has come out. We've obviously got, like, I think 8 Marvel movies since then, which is probably not accurate, but it's probably not that far off either. But one of the complaints that I have with Marvel movies recently is that there's always, like, a handful of scenes that jump out to me. Like, really, they couldn't have made that green screen look a little better? Like in Thor Ragnarok when they're standing on the mountain. Oof. Like, man, that looks pretty bad. And then even times in Black Panther, which is probably in my top 5 MCU movies, there's still times where I'm like, that doesn't look good. But Batman vs. Superman, I thought this time actually consistently looked pretty great throughout the whole movie. Even I was afraid of how Doomsday would look, and for the most part I thought he actually looked pretty cool. Zack Snyder is just such a ambitious director, which I think is a good thing and a bad thing, and it's probably why he's so divisive, is because he has really great themes. Like, the themes of morality in this are amazing, and the idea of, critiquing these characters in the cynical society that we live in today is a really interesting thing. And I love the fact, and I didn't mention it earlier when we talked before we watched the movie, but I actually like the idea of what they were trying to do with Lex Luthor, like turning him into like this Silicon Valley type guy. I was like, that's genius. Like, they just need to pull that off. What I originally thought that they were going to try to do, and it was kind of my fan theory from watching the trailers, is that when he's around people, he's like this eccentric, crazy guy, and then when he's like alone, that he's more of the diabolical, straightforward Lex Luthor. But he's just crazy all the time. But that's just kind of his character, and I think I grew to accept him a little bit more this time. But man, it confuses me so much how somebody sat down to write a screenplay or storyboarded this movie out, and somewhere along the way decided, hey, what if Lex Luthor peed in a jar? Like, we should put that in the movie. I think people would like that. Like, who thinks of that? Like, why is that in the movie? Like, who thought of, just on a fundamental level, like, why does it have to be in the movie? And that's probably still part of my problem with the movie, is that there's so many things that I'm like, why did you do that? So it's a frustrating thing, and maybe, I don't know, Zack Snyder needs to come out with a book, or the 10 people who wrote the screenplay need to come out with several books to explain why they did what they did. But it still kind of feels like, it doesn't feel like one solid screenplay. It feels like 3 screenplays edited together as like this Frankenstein thing, because they're going for so much, I think, and there's a lot to like, but there's also a lot to dislike. This time around, I kind of felt like the movie didn't give me enough of what I wanted, and it gave me way too much of what I didn't want. And so the movie has a problem of like giving too much and too little at the same time. And so for me, this time around, I liked certain things, and the nightmare sequence, like the futuristic sequence, is still like one of my favorite sequences. I really think that it should have been some kind of post-credit scene or something, just to let fans go like, oh, cool, instead of trying to jam it into the middle of the movie and they don't really refer to it ever again. But I love the look of that. I've been looking for like an action figure of Batman in that costume, because I think that's so cool.
Mad Max style.
The way that everything looks in that scene is amazing. I don't know why it's there. But there's still a lot of really things that I like. But like I mentioned, there's just certain things that I didn't like. Do you want to try to respond to any of the complaints that I brought up?
I'll get to Lex Luthor in a minute, because I'm in defense of him. But more specifically, the nightmare sequence. As someone who loves the film, I really don't like that sequence. I think it's
funny how we're like the opposite on everything.
It's so odd. It's so bizarre. But for me, it is a sequence that there isn't really a place for in the film, and it's something that I can see why it's there, because it wants to like just really make Batman that paranoid. Like, it really wants to show, like, oh, here's what Superman is truly capable of. Because then the Flash shows up, and the Flash is like, fear him, you need to be scared of him, and that Flash is clearly from a time when there might be, like, a tyrannical Superman reigning over the Earth. And so, but the problem with that is that it's just redundant. It's pointless. It's not, we get the point already. We understand Batman's motivation. We understand that Batman is on the hunt for Superman. He wants to take him down.
Yeah. And we could have written that off as like a nightmare or something if the Flash didn't show up like right afterwards.
Yeah.
Showing us that, okay, this is a possible future that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why they thought that they needed to jam that in there when the audience has not even been introduced to Flash.
Yeah.
And most of the people that I remember seeing it the first time with didn't even know who that was. They were like, was that Robin? I'm like, no, pretty sure that was the Flash.
Yeah. It's such a bizarre sequence, and it's ultimately the sequence where whenever it comes on, it's the sequence when I just go on my phone for a little bit because there's no point to it. It really has no purpose in the film, and that's so weird to say because I feel like everything else has a purpose, and that scene doesn't, because you could have been played off as just a standard nightmare sequence, because earlier in the film he had a sequence where, you know, he's dreaming about going to his parents' grave, and then like the bat comes out and, like, you know, he wakes up, you know, petrified or terrified anyways. And you could have hammered that home a little bit more and a little bit better and a little bit more seamlessly, but the problem with, you know, the sequence is that it tries to foreshadow Doomsday and all these other things that we end up seeing in Justice League, and it's like an the Injustice comic book run, and it's just like, you could have just done this a little bit better. This should have just not been in the film at all. I get it, it's a great visual, and if anything, it should have been a post-credit scene. But
so yeah, we're in agreement with that. But for me, I mean, that's one of the knocks against the movie. Like, I guess I'm looking at this objectively as like a teacher would to a student who hands in a paper. If a student hands in a paper and there's like an entire paragraph about something that is not the topic of the paper, then I'm like, I'm going to mark you down for that because that doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
And so for you, like, how do you defend that?
Well,
like, you're like, yeah, I acknowledge that it's bad, but this movie is still great.
It's the only scene in the film, or sorry, not the only scene. It's one of the few scenes in the film where, like you just mentioned, it's why, even though I do love it, it's like one of the only things I don't like about the movie, because it's what prevents it from me honestly getting right on the brink of a 100 out of 100. That's how much I love it. And so, and I understand, like, it's such a super high praise, but honestly, like, if that scene and the Justice League scene where she opens the files, and maybe I'm trying to think of anything else I might not like in it, but outside of those two scenes, those are the scenes I would mark down because they don't matter to this part of the story at all. Wonder Woman matters, but nothing else regarding the future of the Justice League, nothing regarding the future of a storyline we might not even see come to life matters. And so those are the two things that they're just pointless.
They could have been better as post-credit scenes.
Yep.
Maybe not the Wonder Woman one, because that'd be pretty boring just to watch a woman open her email for 15 minutes and watch a bunch of stuff. But if they wanted to do some viral marketing like Deadpool did or something, maybe have like some kind of encrypted thing where fans can find it out, and then they could be the ones to look through the email and be the ones that they feel like they're discovering all this footage.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a little cooler.
Yeah.
But they just kind of just crammed it into the movie.
Yeah, it actually just made me think of something, is that the marketing for this movie was just tried to be like shrouded in secrecy, and I guess this is more of a criticism in big pop culture films these days, like Batman v Superman, like Justice League, like Infinity War, like Last Jedi and stuff like that, is I feel like movies that are just don't want to reveal everything, they have things in their film that maybe could have been done in marketing, could have been done as a post-credit scene, could have been done after the film's release on the Blu-ray, whatever it is. And it's like, I feel like just these films feel like they need to be in secrecy, and it's like sometimes you can show your cards a bit, and kind of just let things play out and don't have to insert everything into one film and jam pack it full. And those two scenes, personally, even though it is Zack Snyder's film, obviously, I still feel like those were him being sort of forced by Warner Brothers to probably put him in there and include him in there, because we know now looking with the luxury of hindsight, what that relationship is between Zack Snyder and Warner Brothers. I mean, the guy hasn't even seen Justice League, for goodness sake. I mean, if that doesn't if that doesn't reveal anything, then I mean, what does? It just, and it's so bizarre. But the one point I want to get to is Lex Luthor. To me, I was always worried about the casting, even though I understood what they were going for. And then seeing it in execution for me, and even watching it on this viewing, because that's the one thing I was focusing on the absolute most this time, because you told me to focus on it, and I kind of wanted to see what you saw. And even though he does seem a little unrealistic, and maybe a little is a little bit of an understatement, but he
nobody talks like he talks.
Yeah, and
like he's not an actual person.
And I feel like, and that's totally fair. I just feel like in concept and even in execution, there's a lot of things with Lex Luthor. He is very, and you can sort of see this in a lot of his facial expressions, is that there's lots of times where he's half smiling, half smirking, half frowning, half smirking, whatever it is. And then with his eyes and what he does with his eyebrows, even though it's calculated to me, and it's somebody that knows what they're doing. And to me, that's what's most frightening, is because when we get introduced to him, it's actually one of my favorite scenes in the film, is when we get introduced to Lex Luthor. He's just playing basketball with a bunch of people in a t-shirt and jeans, whatever, at his his business. And I feel like Lex Luthor is sort of like a commentary on these types of big business owners that we have today. Like, they're young, they're quirky, and they're weird. He's not Mark Zuckerberg type, because they're very different types of people. But there's lots of industries that are run by these younger people, and he even says, he inherited the corporation because it was his dad's, and he was born into that life. Similar to like a Donald Trump figure. Don't want to get too political, obviously, but he was able to sort of inherit all this, and he didn't really have to do too much. But it's his corporation now, and so he's working on R&D. He's helping Metropolis rebuild after the Man of Steel incident and stuff like that. And so people look to Lex Luthor as a figure of being as like a savior, as someone who is able to assist them in growing again and prospering. Because if Metropolis is the city of the tomorrow, is the term, right? Is that what they use? The city of tomorrow is that's who they go to, is Lex Luthor. And sort of, and kind of like how I mentioned earlier in the show, he's somebody that wants to portray Superman in a bad light, and he's somebody that wants to say, because like I said, people look up to him as like this business figure, and he wants to portray Superman in a bad light, because when he's talking to like the politicians, and he's talking to what's the actress's name that plays the senator? Always forget her name.
Oh, yeah, Holly Hunt.
Holly Hunt. Okay, yeah. He talks to her about, there's lots of really great foreshadowing in the movie, specifically with Lex, is that when he introduces the kryptonite, and he says they've used it on General Zod's body, and he wants to sort of use it as like a silver bullet in their gun, but she ends up blocking the import license or whatever. And he says he doesn't want to have to depend on the kindness of monsters, which early on you sort of see the early stages of his plan, and his plan for the later stages, where that line is about Doomsday, and he doesn't want to have to depend on Doomsday, because if Batman follows through with the kryptonite, then he doesn't have to work on Doomsday, and that doesn't have to, because he could have easily canceled that, and he could have easily have not gone through with it. But since Batman didn't fulfill what he had thought, because he thought he had convinced Batman enough to push him over the edge to kill Superman with the Capitol building blowing up, which at the party sequence, it's not too subtle, but it's right there. There's a cake that looks like the Capitol building. And so at Lex's party that he invited Batman and Superman to, and that he invited, maybe Diana got there on her own, which I'm assuming is the case. But I just feel like he's a character that, even though there's some conveniences in there, I feel like in the end, when you look at his plan and look at every step of his plan, if you remove 2 or 3 parts, then it could make the whole thing blow up. And I feel like at least it doesn't rely on just one incident or one sequence or one character. Because like, there's other villains in other films where they'll have this super big plan, right? And they want to bring people together, and they want to get them to fight or whatever. But if one thing goes wrong, the whole thing blows up. But I feel like at least with Lex's plan, there's multiple things, so that it's not relying on just one thing. It's relying on multiple.
Yeah, and I think I saw that this time around, but it's funny that you're bringing this up as a strength after rewatch, but after my rewatch, I think I'm convinced that you can just like completely remove Lex Luthor from this movie, and like just through a couple of like writing things, you could just made this a quicker, better movie and make it about Batman versus Superman, rather than Lex Luthor versus Superman versus Batman and Doomsday thrown in too. Like Lex's motivations, like you said, they were super complicated, and I get that he was trying to have a bunch of fallback plans, and I think that was actually really interesting. And this could just be a tribute to the way that Zack Snyder set him up in the movie, that you can interpret it in a lot of different ways. But this time around, like, I'm just more convinced through the ultimate cut that Superman didn't need Lex Luthor to go and fight Batman. I mean, when they meet, and I think he crushes his car or whatever, and he's like, you know, if you put that symbol in the sky again, like, I'm going to come after you. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, when the symbol goes into the sky, like, he didn't need Lex Luthor to kidnap his mom. He could have just been like, okay, Batman, that's it, and just gone straight towards him. And again, going back to one of my complaints before watching the movie is just not getting enough Superman. It's like if you took some time away from the time that they gave to Lex Luthor and gave it more to Clark Kent, the investigator, that would have been far more fascinating and far more developmental for his character. So, you have Superman wanting to rid the world of vigilantes, and then you have Batman not trusting aliens, and I think that's enough. Like, they could have just run with that. Yeah. And so I don't mind like Lex Luthor being crazy and Lex Luthor being the way that he is as much this time around, because I'm kind of used to it. Yeah. But it's just, the question is why? Like, why did the writers think that they had to do this? Because it's a really long movie. Like, this, you just don't have to do this. And so that's probably part of my problem. So I don't even know if that's a critique or if it's like more of just a disgruntled or confusing why. Like, why am I watching this?
Yeah, and I feel like that's fair, because, you know, even watching it as many times as I have, it's like, because there is that motivation for Batman and Superman to already sort of be on the path of fighting each other, because Batman is waging war against Superman. That's what he wants. He wants to take him down. He doesn't think that, you know, they can have someone with absolute power existing in this world, and it sort of challenges his sense of priority in the universe, because he's a character that has retired and has moved on from that life, but he now sees Superman in the same light he does the Joker, which is one of my favorite lines in the film. And Ben Affleck in this movie, I think, does a really great job of just capturing the true essence of old, grizzled, veteran Batman. And I think that, because even though he does shine his light in the sky to sort of tempt Superman, because he knows, like, and it's a character trait that's been in all the comics and their relationship together, is that Batman sort of does push Clark's buttons sometimes, and we sort of see that within Batman v Superman, where he does shine the light in the sky because he knows that he's going to come for him, and that's exactly what he wants. And he does get the kryptonite, and Superman doesn't know that the kryptonite exists at this point. Am I forgetting already? It's so early in the morning, my brain isn't even processing correctly until like 10:30. So when he does get to Lex, and he does find out that his mom has been, you know, captured, it's the scene in the film that is, when you kind of look at it with a larger lens, you're like, why? You know, like, why does it have to be him that pushes him over the edge? I mean, but in a way, you know, if you look at Superman and Batman, if they go and wage a war against one another and they fight, Superman isn't going to kill, because even though there's this sort of narrative that's pushed with these films, Superman isn't a killer. That's not what he wants. He made mistakes in Man of Steel because he's a flawed hero. He's a character that made mistakes because he'd only been this Superman figure.
He's only been Superman for like a week or a day.
A day, yeah. Like, he hasn't been Superman for long, so, you know, it's understandable. But he doesn't go out of his way, and he's not a cold-blooded killer. He doesn't just go into buildings and start punching civilians in the face.
Well, he did go into, like, Africa or wherever that was and straight up kill that guy who had a gun to Lois Lane's head. Like, the first thing you see Superman do in this movie is kill someone.
Yeah, and that's a very strange moment, because and I guess that's sort of a testament to how the writing for you is sort of just weird. It's like, even though it's a cool shot and it's a cool moment, it's like there's like 80 other ways that he could have could have done that. He could have used his laser vision to heat up the gun. Well, although it probably would have made the bullets go off. But, he could have heated up his hand. He could have, he could have taken the gun away from him.
But, there's just a lot of that scene in particular. There's some confusing things, and I'll just throw this out there, too, because I think it's probably a common complaint, but I want to make sure we talk about it. Just for the random reason that the guy that they kill in that scene is named Jimmy Olsen. Like, I just don't know why they would name him that. It's like the same equivalent as calling John Blake Robin at the end of Dark Knight Rises. It's like, why did you have to do that? Like, who are you trying to impress?
Yeah,
like we don't get to see the actual Robin, and in here we don't get to hang out with Jimmy Olsen. So why even name him James Olsen or whatever they did, and then just to kill him right there?
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where it doesn't really affect the experience, but it's the Robin thing, because I love The Dark Knight Rises, and we've had our discussions on other podcasts and other times in threads about The Dark Knight Rises, but it's one of the things in The Dark Knight Rises where it's like, why'd you have to wink at the fans like that? Like,
yeah, stop winking at us.
Yeah,
I mean, I could maybe guess that it is Zack Snyder being like, hey, this isn't the stories that you're used to. And so, like, right at the beginning, if you're killing a character that you think that people associate with the original campy Superman, then that could be something that he's trying to show. But I think the problem with Zack Snyder that I've seen a lot is that, like I mentioned before, he's just so ambitious. Like, everything is just so grand and so amazing that when he tries to do subtle things, sometimes I think it's almost too subtle. So the audience, like, they almost have to think into it or like play into it a little bit much and come up with their own theories, which I guess you could see as that's part of the fun with Zack Snyder's. You can come up with your own theories, but at the same time, you don't really know exactly what he was going for, because it's just not, I don't want it to be super obvious, but it needs to be a little more obvious than just like the little subtle hints that he hints at sometimes. Yeah,
and I think that what he does with imagery and what he captures, because to me, like, if I were to have anybody direct action in a comic book movie, it'd probably be Zack Snyder, because he just has the ability to just capture it in this insanely perfect scale. Like, I feel like every time he captures Superman flying at Zod, it's like, wow, this is how I would imagine seeing it in live action right off a page, or Batman in the Warehouse specifically. And even though he does things in such an ambitious way, and I do feel personally that sometimes those themes can be lost underneath everything, and then they can be lost underneath these big time visuals and all the imagery related to like Christ, and imagery related to a bunch of other things like, Greek tragedies and stuff like that. And I just think that it's one of his weaknesses as a director, and it's something he could work on, because another film, for example, that I don't particularly like, but I appreciate for what he accomplishes, is Sucker Punch, because that movie is ultimately about, sort of females being objectified by males, and how they have to use that to sort of escape the grasp of a male-dominated society. And I think that's a really great thing, but it just gets lost because of the visuals and because of the ambitiousness, like you mentioned. And it's one of his weaknesses as a director, and I feel like he can do it in a way where he can have that ambitious scale, but he can sort of streamline it in a way that doesn't make it seem like the themes don't matter. And like you mentioned, though, I feel like that's one of my favorite things about him as a director, though, where you do kind of have to like sort of analyze these frames and sort of look at character arcs from where they are at the beginning of the film to the end. And I feel like Batman's arc specifically is something that is really well done. I think it's exceptionally well done, because there's a lot of things in the film that it isn't too exposition heavy, but it hints at a fact that Bruce Wayne, the existence of Superman has made him change his entire perception of his past self, where he was like, we've always been criminals, but now it's just time to go over the edge. We have to kill people. We have to make, things seem a little more, take things a little more seriously, because now there's people that can hurl thunderbolts and, shoot lasers out of their eyes and fly across the sky super quick, and stuff like that. And, by the end of the film, even though he's lost faith in humanity because a figure with that much power has caused the death of so many, when he's watching the Capitol building blown up, like, he's pissed. Like, he's like, how could someone like that let this happen? But then we find out that, because Superman, one of his weaknesses is he can't see through
Lead.
Yeah. So, is that he can't see through lead, and so by the end of the film, he's gone through a complete arc. He's gone from a character that's fallen from grace, and by the end, he believes in humanity again, and that they can rally around like a figure like Superman, and to be a little more selfless and not think about yourself so much. And then you look at Diana after Wonder Woman, which even though Wonder Woman I feel like should have started the DC universe, with the hindsight of Batman v Superman and knowing what the future has for her, you see a character that lost faith in humanity because of what happened in Wonder Woman, and then she comes back with the end because Superman was able to instill that hope again with her, and then with Superman instilling hope with the world, because he's a character that people didn't believe in. And he was a figure of controversy, and by the end, he is this like beloved figure that saved the entire world. And I just feel like the character arcs to me are so well done, and I feel like even though they do kind of get lost sometimes in the grand visuals, I feel like it is a truly amazing arc for Batman, Superman, and even Wonder Woman's minimal role.
Yeah, I think Zack Snyder, he does all those really well, but I think there's no room for all that stuff. I feel like Zack Snyder was probably the kid in high school where the teacher asked for like a 2-page paper, and he handed in like a 20-page paper, and he's like, hey, check out all these cool ideas, and the teacher's like, how do I even grade this? And so that's kind of how I feel like looking at this, like I could see all the good things you're trying to do, but I asked you to do this one specific thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of good ideas does not a good movie make.
Yeah, and that's fair.
Like with all of those, it's like, man, I really want this to be a good movie. You probably do either need to like add an hour to it or take an hour away from it to make it a good movie. At least it's a better movie with the ultimate cut. And maybe you're onto something with Zack Snyder, that maybe WB just needed to give him full reign, because it does feel like there's a lot of things that they made him do. I mean, from after the Martha moment, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but after the Martha moment, I found myself not even trying to critique it at all, and I just watched it through the rest of it going like, wow, this is really great. Like the ending, just like the very last act of that movie is so good that it's just kind of clunky getting up to that point. Like I wrote down, like, is this Man of Steel 2? Is this a Batman introduction? Is this a Justice League introduction? Is this a deep and thoughtful piece on terrorism and cynicism? Is it about like Jesus? Is it about Flashpoint? Is it about like Doomsday coming or the death of Superman? Like they took all of the best stories from the comics of the last 60 years, and instead of trying to do them justice, they took some of the best parts and just tried to cram them all into one. Yeah. So in a way, it's kind of like I love steak, and I love Skittles, and I love grapefruit juice. But like if I went to a restaurant and they gave me a steak that was like sprinkled with Skittles and served with grapefruit juice, I'd be like, what the heck are you doing? Like, these don't go together. Yeah. Like I want all of them, but not mixed together all at the same time.
Yeah. It is a movie with a lot going on, and it is the Dark Knight Returns meets Superman Doomsday meets Death of Superman.
I didn't even mention Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and I'm not a big comics person, and I feel like did you read comics growing up, or were you someone that really dived into that? Because you were born just a little bit before me.
Yeah, I was born late 80s, and so like the first comic run that I remember getting as a little kid, and I think it was even after the fact, but I remember being interested, was the Death of Superman arc that was kind of in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. I was like, wow, Doomsday seems like a really cool guy. But I mostly grew up watching the Batman animated cartoon series of the 90s and Batman Beyond, and then Justice League in the late 90s, early 2000s. But I always I tried to read the comic books as much as I could. And it wasn't until I got older that I looked back at older comic books. Like I've been trying to collect a bunch of Batman comics from the 1970s, but they're just so hard to find. But I think I'm a fan of kind of classic Batman stories, but I'm also a fan of just graphic novels too. And so it probably wasn't until college that I actually read The Dark Knight Returns and like Batman Year One and Watchmen and all that stuff. So it wasn't until like the mid 2000s, late 2000s that I got into that stuff.
Yeah, it's and one of the things that I've noticed is that there are lots of people who don't. I would say more than at least 70% of the people that don't like this film are people that really grew up with a lot of like the Superman and Batman comics, and a lot of Christopher Reeve's Superman, and a lot of Michael Keaton's Batman, and there's sort of that, there's that understanding of how you're so used to seeing this character, and then to sort of get this, it's such a 180. It's so different.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and that's totally fair because, again, the entire point that we're trying to make here, and we're going to touch on the big Martha moment before we go, because you have to go soon. But there's the entire point here is that the film medium is so wild and so crazy, and I feel like Zack Snyder, for better or worse, he is ultimately, to me, the director that sort of exemplifies how beautiful this medium can be and how frustrating it can be, where he's a director that has his own unique cinematic language, and he has the ability to speak to certain audience members through the visuals he puts on screen, because he's not a very exposition heavy director. Look at a lot of his films, outside of maybe The Guardians of Ga'Hoole and maybe Dawn of the Dead. Those are films that are lesser, or probably his weaker films, but his big films, Watchmen, Sucker Punch, Batman v Superman, Man of Steel, and now Justice League, unfortunately, they are films that, don't use a lot of dialogue to sort of connect or sort of get the message and point across, and there is usually just visuals, and I feel like that's one of his best traits as a director, but it also could be seen as his weakness. And there maybe needs to be a little bit more meat to chew on the bone, and there maybe needs to be not so many Skittles on top of the steak, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like he just sort of exemplifies everything that makes the medium so great, but everything that can make it so frustrating at the same time. And I feel like he's a director that, because I am a fan, and I would say something like this, but I feel like he is a little bit ahead of the time. And I feel like, because look at a movie like Watchmen, it's dated tremendously, and more people have come around that as well. A movie like Man of Steel has been aging really well as well, where more people have been getting on that hype train. And even for you, Batman v Superman, just 2 years removed, it's a slight progression, but it's little things, and it has aged a very tiny bit for you. And it's a movie and a director, to me, that sort of understands what this medium can accomplish, but for a lot of people, he just doesn't tap into what we're used to seeing, and he doesn't tap, and he just needs to understand that maybe less is more, not because he is someone that really goes for the the home run every time, and he goes for that grand slam. And I'm someone who grew up playing baseball twice a year every year for about 10 to 13 years, and if I go for that grand slam every time, I'm probably gonna miss. I might foul it away, I might make it a fair ball, and I won't get the grand slam. But, maybe if I just focus a little bit more on at least making contact with the ball, then I have a better chance of making it a rewarding at-bat for everybody on the team and not just myself, if that makes sense. And I
think it makes sense. Because when I look at this movie, I would still say it's an important movie, but I don't think it's a good movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's important in that it did crazy things to film criticism, film fans, fan criticism, that I don't even remember a time before this, or even before Man of Steel, where fans on the internet have lost their minds about comic book characters as much as this film.
Yeah.
And we're both a part of the Movie Talk by Movie Fans Facebook group, and can attest that you can look at before the DCEU and after the DCEU. There's just a difference of how fans are talking about films.
Yeah,
so it's an important movie, but I still don't really think it's a good movie. Like, there are good parts to it. It just doesn't all come together. It's just a little sloppy.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on the Martha moment real quick, or however long, but again, you have to go quite soon. But so, like I mentioned really early on, I had something come up recently where I was at a party with my girlfriend, and long story short, we were getting ready to leave. A bunch of guys were there that weren't supposed to be there. They tried to fight the host of the party, and as we were leaving, this guy, he pulled out a gun right in front of me, cocked it back, and aimed it in my general direction.
Oh, man.
And it's something that I never thought I would experience in my life. And it's something, in the heat of the moment, I had my girlfriend with me and there was 20 or 30 other people behind me, where I turned around and instantly said that we have to leave now. And so instincts, boom, ran, got to my car, was safe. And that entire night, on my way back home, I felt fine. I felt okay. It was an experience, and my girlfriend was crying, and she was obviously upset, and a bunch of other people were upset. They couldn't believe that they had experienced something like that. No one got hurt or anything. The guy had gotten jumped by 4 people, so he was beat up, but he looked fine. He actually did an amazing job fighting off 4 people. But just that experience of sort of there being a moment in your life that sort of it's been almost 2 weeks, but there are very tiny moments and very tiny things where at that party that night I felt like something was going to go wrong, and I felt like I was having deja vu. And so now whenever I have deja vu, I feel triggered. I get reminded that there was that moment where I could have died, right? And obviously I didn't, but there was that moment where I was like, this is it, And so when I was watching it this time, it sort of did hit a little bit, closer because of just how timely it is, and just how, I feel like I really put a lot of stock into movies that sort of are able to hold up a mirror to myself. Like a movie like Inside Llewyn Davis right now is also a movie that is just really hitting close to home, and I'm afraid to watch it because I'm afraid I'm going to blubber like a baby for most of the film. and it's something that I feel like in Batman v Superman is done really, really well. Because even though, and I will contend, and it's a completely fair criticism, why does he say Martha? I don't know. And again, Zack Snyder could have played a little bit of small ball. He obviously did investigate on the Batman, but he didn't investigate on Bruce Wayne. He only knows so much, right? Because even when Bruce Wayne gets to the party, he's like, who's Bruce Wayne? Why he would say Martha? Don't entirely know. Is it contrived? Yes. But I feel like in concept and even in execution, it's ultimately Batman's response to that really connects with me more than anything and makes me forget that it is a little contrived. And because for him, it's that trigger. We've seen him have this sort of PTSD where he's waking up in the middle of the night. It's a coping mechanism for him to drink and for him to sleep with all these girls, right? And my coping mechanism for that incident I had is I try as much as possible to play video games and just talk to people about movies because it gets my mind off of it. When I see a big group of kids, that's a trigger for me. When I see a red Solo cup, because I remember there being those are the things I was looking at as I was leaving the party, and those are some triggers. Even when I see my girlfriend and talk to my girlfriend, just imagining her and that scenario, it is kind of a trigger for me. And I feel like on this experience, it really got to me. And I feel like it's a sequence where, even though that could be one big moment that ruined the movie for people, but for me personally, it's a sequence that I loved it even before, but now I love it even more because I'm able to connect with it in that way. So that's sort of my thought on that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the Martha moment, I was never a hater of the Martha moment. Even the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, both of their moms' names Martha. That blows my mind. And so I was like sitting there like, whoa.
Yeah.
But then I think it was after people complaining about it, talking about it, I kind of was brought down to earth a little bit. And I was like, yeah, why does Superman call his own mom Martha? Like, doesn't he just call her mom?
Yeah.
Can he just be like, hey, could you please help me say my mom?
Yeah, and I feel like that would have even been enough.
Yeah, and if you go with the Danger Spate cut of the Batman vs Superman, where you just take out Lex Luthor and everything still works fine, you wouldn't really have the need for that in the first place.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind it the first time. I just think that they could have used something else as the trigger. I think the idea of the trigger, like you mentioned, is brilliant. Like, I love the way they set up Batman with the PTSD, but it would have been so much easier as a trigger to use a gun or like an actual gun. So they set up the flashback of his parents at the beginning of the movie, and maybe there's a scene where Batman is holding a gun to Superman's head, having beaten him, like in the same exact way that Joe Chill, or whoever they want to call him, is holding it up to Martha's head. And that could have been the PTSD that they showed a flashback, and he could have been like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And that probably could have been better for a character moment instead of a meme basically.
Yeah.
Is what it's turned into.
Yeah, and I think that, and it's a completely fair criticism. I love, because when you call it the danger spate cut, what you do is you remove things, but you still keep the director's vision, soul, goal intact. And I feel like a lot of people, when they criticize movies, they try and just rearrange it to how they want it. But for example, what you want is something that still keeps the director's vision intact, and that's fair criticism to me. That's fair play, and I can't argue that, because again, like, that's what's so amazing about movies, is that I have that moment that connects me with the film now on a deeper level, and you might not have something like that, or someone else might not have something like that, but there are other people who might feel the same way I do. There's been so many articles I've read that have almost brought tears to my eyes, because people see the Batman v Superman and Man of Steel story as ultimately an immigrants coming to America and their role in this country. And I feel like if people see that, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And if people don't, that's also a beautiful, beautiful thing, because it allows me to look at things with a new perspective, in a new light, and see things with a new point of view. And it's so amazing that a movie like Batman v Superman single-handedly can bring so many people together, but also distance so many people apart. And
yeah, that's what I think, that some of the issues with the fan community is, why does this have to be like a split into, well, I hate this movie now, or it tears fans apart? Why not use it as an opportunity to talk about the theories and the themes in the film? Like, you can just be on one side of the fence. Like right now, we've been talking for an hour about this movie, and both of us enjoy probably the same parts of the movie, and we have a lot of common ground, but I'm not like, well, I can't talk to you now, or like, I just don't understand you. Yeah. Like, I don't think that you're stupid for liking this movie. You might be a little delusional for liking this movie, but and hopefully you'll grow out of that. And when you become a dad like me, you'll look at this and be like, oh yeah, this is a little sloppy. Yeah. Or maybe you can become a teacher or something and be like, you know what? Yeah, I wouldn't grade this as high as I would before.
That's fair.
But no, but I think it's just, film is just so subjective, and if there's any like case study that needs to be done, you can just throw this movie in there, or throw The Last Jedi in there, or even throw some old Stanley Kubrick movies in there.
Absolutely.
You can throw in like Clockwork Orange, or even The Shining, especially at the time, extremely divisive, but almost universally acclaimed now, just because of what the movies did. And you might disagree with how the director went about it. Just because you don't like the movie doesn't mean that it's not an important movie. And I'm not trying to like elevate this movie to like Kubrick level or anything, but no, I'm saying that it's always an opportunity to talk about movies.
Yeah. And some of my favorite movies ever, like A Clockwork Orange, like The Shining, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Eyes Wide Shut, and now Batman v Superman and Last Jedi, even though I have been in many debates and discussions where it has gotten too argumentative, too aggressive, too fanboyish, or too much of a flame war, what it's done for me is able to really just change my entire perception of cinema and how movies connect with people, how movies disconnect with certain people. And I feel like it's a movie that is going to always be looked at as a film that changed the course of cinema for better or worse. And it's not cinema necessarily, but fan discussion, as you mentioned earlier. And and that's a really important thing. And that wasn't Zack Snyder's goal. He set out to make the best movie he ever could within 3.5 hours or 3 hours, or whatever his original cut was. And even though it didn't reach that goal for a lot of people it did. And I feel like if you look at the responses to Zack Snyder, and we're even seeing it right now again with Rian Johnson, people like want death threats. People want this person to, it's like, hold the phone.
Well, that's kind of where I would differ, and I feel like a hypocrite, because my judgment against Batman vs Superman is like, why are you doing this with these characters that I love so much? Why deconstruct them? But on the other side, I love The Last Jedi and what Rian Johnson did, because I personally felt like the Star Wars saga needed to be stirred up a little bit. It needed to have that change in the timeline to make things go in a different direction, because I mean, that was a lot of people's complaints about The Force Awakens, and they can't have it both ways. You can't complain about it just being the same thing and then now being like completely different. And I love both of them as a film, looking at it just as a standalone film. And I don't think that makes me a hypocrite, but I think that just certain films hit me in a different way for different reasons.
And you know, that's what's also amazing about film is I feel like even just film discussion is that a lot of people are like, oh, well, you said it for this film here. Why aren't you saying it for this one? And it's like, film is a case-by-case basis. You can't say like, oh, all these things I hated in Batman v Superman are also in The Last Jedi, so I have to hate that too. If you're judging film by that standard, then you're ultimately defeating a lot of what makes film so special. You know, you have to judge it on its own merits and within its own story.
I always feel like film should be always viewed in context. Like you can't watch 2001 like in context now, because then you'll see it and be like, okay, there's some great things here, but what the heck is this movie about? Like if you see it in the context of somebody from the 1960s, like your mind is going to be blown. It's like when you're reading a book from the 1700s or something. Like read it in that context and what it meant for those people, and then draw the implications for today.
Yep. I completely agree, and that's why I think within 50 years' time, when you're in your 80s and I'm in my 70s, we might have a discussion again about how well has Batman v Superman aged or de-aged.
Pull out that old 4K player.
Yeah. Well, we're watching everything in like a hologram now. We're just immersed in the experience in 50 years. But
I miss 4K. You remember 4K?
Oh man, 4K is one day going to be looked at as a VHS, and I cannot wait. It's hilarious. So that'll do it. We're going to play one quick game real quick. It's only going to take a minute long. The ABCs of movies. You have 1 minute to give me a movie starting with each letter of the alphabet, starting from A going to Z. Couple rules.
I am not ready for this.
Like every game, it comes with rules, and the first letter of the movie has to start with that letter of the alphabet. So, for example, The Greatest Showman only qualifies for T, not G. Or any other movie that starts with the. Also, if you say a movie from a franchise, you have to say which film from that franchise. As big Harry Potter fans, for example, you can't just say Harry Potter. You have to give me which Harry Potter film, or which Lord of the Rings film, or which Hobbit film, or which Spider-Man film. Although if you just say Spider-Man, that works. So
like movies that start with the is always T?
Always T. Can't be. Yeah.
There's so many thes.
Yeah. I know, that was one of the things I was like, maybe it's a little too challenging, and if someone doesn't beat the record that's set by me and Mikey Brzezinski at 15, then maybe I'll have to remove that rule. But I just want to see if someone can actually get to Z without having to use the on there, because it only qualifies for T. So lots of thes. So let me know when you're ready. I'll count down from 5, and as soon as I say go, I start the timer.
Okay. I think maybe I got to get A in my head first. Okay.
It's the first letter of the alphabet.
All right, let's go for it. Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. A Few Good Men, Back to the Future, C, City of God, D, B, Donnie Darko, E, Elephant Man, F, Forrest Gump, G, The Godfather, it's easy, H is How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, pulling out the weird movies. I, there's got to be some movie that starts with N. Into the Wild, J, Jurassic Park, K, King Kong, L is The Land Before Time, M, Mama, N, New,
Time.
Dang it.
Yeah, the ends always get a lot of people hung me up for a while as well. Mikey and I got to P.
Nice.
Couldn't beat Q. Q's a tough one.
Q would be quiet. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't use
Quantum
those
of Solace.
Quantum of Solace.
Quest for Camelot. There's not a lot of Q's. So, good job. I believe you got 12, which is really good. You got almost as, I believe you got as much as Brady last week. So might have to have a competition with you guys one day in the future.
Brady can't even go outside where he lives, so of course he's doing pretty good.
Of course, yeah. Well, great discussion, Caleb. I'm really glad I had you on for this week specifically. Couldn't have asked for a better guest to have it with someone so level-headed and so fair and understanding, of course, of other points of view. And so where can people find you on the internet or anywhere else?
Yeah, you can find me on the internet hanging out in Movie Talk by Movie Fans on the Facebook group. You can check me out on Twitter or Instagram, posting pictures of my cute daughter or my dogs or food that I eat. But yeah, it's been great being on a podcast again. It's been a really long time since I've been on a podcast. For those of you who don't know, I was trying to make our group do a podcast, the Movie Talk by Movie Fans Facebook group. And we almost got to episode 50, but I took a different job this semester that's kind of run into some of my time. So this summer, I'm going to try to get back to 50 episodes. And so if Roman wants to be on that or other people want to be on that, we can make sure that happens. So at least we can get to 50 and then decide if we want to keep going or do something different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great podcast. And a lot of my inspiration for this podcast stems from that. Because we did have some discussions in Facebook Messenger about that, how trying to make up a theme for this week, and luckily you came up with the most brilliant idea for this week because it captures.
I am pretty brilliant.
It captures the tone of what I'm going for in the show, and hopefully we have been executing that pretty well for the last couple of weeks. Now 8 weeks in, it's pretty crazy. 8 weeks, and feels like I've been doing this forever. So where you can find me, Roman's Movie Reviews on Facebook. You can find me possibly writing for a magazine that my friend Matthew hooked me up with. We'll see about that. So be on the lookout for that in the future. You can find me on Facebook, Roman RBC. Obviously subscribe to the channel, Showtime with Roman. I've got a couple videos coming out that I'm working on. Going to be working on an Infinity War video and why it's not this generation's Empire Strikes Back yet.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then I'm also going to be working on more podcasts, hopefully more video editorials. Just right now, I've been taking a lot of punches recently in my personal life. So hopefully in a month's time, I'll be super on track and everything will be going well. I'm going to be trying to write some more articles. I've been sort of deviating from that a bit. But keep on enjoying movies. Thank you guys for listening to this awesome episode. I thought one of my favorite episodes I've done yet. All my episodes are my favorite episodes, but this one's one of my favorite episodes yet.
You can't choose from your children.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you guys for listening once again. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and keep tuning in every week. Next week, I have Deadpool 2 comes out next week, right? So I have one of my good friends, Mike Calkins, on, and we're going to be previewing Deadpool 2 and talking about some news topics next week. I'm super excited about that as well. Can't wait to get him on. So thank you guys once again. Have a wonderful rest of your week.